Czech government just fell this week. The Czech government not falling should really have been the news for a while. You recall they took about 6 months to form the government after the last election. It's a very unhappy family, and at the moment they have, if you like, had a fallout over how to stimulate the economy, or if so at all. I think matters in Prague are not improved by the personality of President Klaus, who is well known for not being able to get along with anybody. Now, let me sort of move around a little bit. Romania just landed on IMF loan, I think yesterday. Obviously, Romania has its problems. Let me just say that within the last 2 years I've been both to Transylvania and to Cuba, having seen the countryside. You wouldn't think so, but it's the Transylvanians who are far better off just sort of driving along the road. But they have serious problems, and they have the same problems as Hungary has. Now, if you read the Gazette, which usually is a mistake, you probably read that the Premier of Hungary has resigned, which is not true. He hasn't resigned at all. He said he will resign. There's a big difference. Now, Hungary does not have a Westminster-type constitution. It has a German-type constitution. In other words, the House cannot just vote down a prime minister and then he goes. The House has got to say, we no longer want Mr. X. Instead, we want Mr. Y. Now, you've got to have a majority vote passing, having both names in it. Usually, it's very easy to find people who dislike Mr. X, but they usually disagree on the identity of Mr. Y. So the outgoing prime minister is still very much the incumbent prime minister, and the last plausible Mr. Y fell this afternoon. So there's a great search on for Mr. Y's, and I'm sure they'll find somebody in there. Then I'd rather go on teaching economics. The issue here is essentially the same economic issue that we have talked about in this room before. Hungary, ever since the 1950s, has been in a situation where total government expenditure exceeded government income. The difference has been financed by borrowing, which went extremely well until last October, when Hungary found itself simply unable to sell its government bonds. Now, not being able to sell your government bonds is very embarrassing, because then you have to sell them to the central bank, and that's just monetizing the debt, and that leads to inflation. At the same time, Hungary was hit by the same crisis that everybody else is. Now, you might think of Hungary as a country that exports gypsies or goulash or something like that. But in fact, Hungary's major export, this surprised me when I found out, is automobiles and parts. Any Audi that you see driving up and down the streets of Montreal has an engine built in Hungary. Now, you know what has been happening to the automotive industry, and therefore simultaneously what you've got is a country that's got to cut its expenditures and imports in order to balance the books, and a country where the business cycle has hit with a vengeance. It's not an enviable position to be in. No government can really survive what comes out of a situation like this. So at the moment, the people in opposition really sort of hope that they don't have to go for early elections, but they must press the issue simply because they're doing so well in the polls that it's irresistible. It's not a cheerful situation.
Any questions on Hungary?
Well, what has been happening, of course, in order to be able to sell its debt, Hungary has been having very high interest rates in relation to the rest of the world, and therefore Hungarians who are borrowing for housing purposes could go to banks and borrow at close to Swiss rates in Swiss francs or Japanese rates in yen or in euros. at much lower rates. So what you've got are the five major banks with loan portfolios heavily defined in foreign currency, which the locals now have to repay out of their incomes, which are earned in depreciating, and they keep depreciating, forints. Therefore, there's a real problem with the loan portfolio of these banks. Now, 4 out of the 5 are foreign-owned. One of them is owned by General Electric. And therefore, the great white hope is that the parent banks will support the branch banks in Hungary. But there's no legal obligation to do so. They're just great white hopes. And that, too, is a factor, as Udo has pointed out, making things uncertain.